Why do so many people become professional nerds? You're about to find out as we sit down with author James Aquilone and discover that rock and roll is just too hard. Greetings and welcome to another brand new, fresh out of the oven episode of the Nerd Byword Podcast, the only podcast that gets your nerd bacon sizzling every single week. We've got a special episode this week. We'll be speaking with author James Aquilone about his work on the Dead Jack series of novels, an upcoming tabletop RPG with Raven Desk Games, and his forthcoming comic book Man Bomb. But first, as is Nerd Byword tradition, we kick things off with some nerdy nerd news. Kris, what you got?
John Boyega slams Star Wars and Disney. An interview with GQ, Boyega discussed the poor handling, in his opinion, of his character Finn and others. Quoting here from the article, "But what I would say to Disney is do not bring out a black character, market them to be much more important in the franchise than they are, and then have them pushed to the side. It's not good. I'll say it straight up. Like, you guys knew what to do with Daisy Ridley. You knew what to do with Adam Driver. You knew what to do with these other people. But when it came to Kelly Marie Tran, when it came to John Boyega, you knew F all. So what do you want me to say? What they want you to say is, I enjoyed being a part of it. It was a great experience. Nah. I'll take that deal when it's a great experience. They gave all the nuance to Adam Driver, all the nuance to Daisy Ridley. Let's be honest. Daisy knows this. Adam knows this. Everybody knows. I'm not exposing anything." So essentially what he is advocating for is all the characters of color and all of the characters who represent underrepresented groups of people in Star Wars and in Hollywood at large are marketed as, look at who we've cast here, and then when it comes to the storyline of these films, they're put on a shelf, or they're put on as I say, like a side quest. Now, I'm maybe in one camp, and that I will fight for and defend The Last Jedi. I know that may be a controversial opinion in the nerd community, but one aspect I was not a fan of is Finn's storyline. Like, John Boyega is a fantastic actor, and the character of Finn is such a compelling character. And then when you had like all this promotion, leading up to The Force Awakens, of him ripping off that Stormtrooper helmet, it's such an iconic part of that initial trailer when we first saw it. And then you thought, like, oh man, could we have a black guy being a Jedi? Could we have like a Stormtrooper resist all of that? So let's just play this out here. You have a Stormtrooper who has been brainwashed since birth and been conditioned to carry out all of the orders and all of the strategies of the First Order, to be this, machine, this robotic entity. He has the ability within him to resist that. You set it up beautifully, and now he wants to join the side of the resistance, wants to join the good guys, if you will. And then you have it hinted at in The Rise of Skywalker that he's force sensitive, but you don't confirm it. You have to deal with the novelization or exit interviews with the cat or with the crew. You didn't just out there and say it. So think about the amazing storyline you could have had. Resist the brainwashing of being a Stormtrooper. He's a Jedi. What better story could you ask for than that? And instead, you have him on this side mission where he goes to Space Vegas. And then you also do the same thing with Kelly Marie Tran, who went through the abuse and mistreatment that no human being, I don't care if they're an actor, I don't care what their occupation is, the mistreatment and the abuse online that you went through, no one should ever go through that. No one, especially someone as talented as Kelly Marie Tran is as an actor. And then you have, everything that she went through after The Last Jedi to be jettisoned in episode 9 with like 2 scenes. And this is probably just a small microcosm of my feelings towards the 9th film, is I felt like that entire movie was just an apology for The Last Jedi, and Kelly Marie Tran's limited exposure in that film, limited inclusion in that film, is just a part of that. But so John Boyega is willing to say what no one else is willing to say. Dave, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm actually really glad he's speaking out. I was reading this article earlier today, and did Disney and Lucasfilm fail his character Finn? Absolutely. He was by far one of the most interesting things about The Force Awakens. There was so much potential in his storyline. A stormtrooper who defects, and a journey that he takes. No matter which way you want to take it, the story possibilities are endless. His arc of wanting to run away in fear and then sticking around and finding his inner bravery was great. And then The Last Jedi basically repeated that same story arc. I mean, they took the same idea. At the beginning of the movie, there he is. He's wanting to run away again. He's afraid again. He doesn't want to stand and fight. And it takes another character to teach him the lesson he already learned in the previous movie. And then they completely sideline him in Rise of Skywalker. I mean, so screen time, certainly he's there, but he doesn't have an arc. There's nothing really going on with his character. There's no growth. There's no forward momentum. It's such a waste of an interesting character portrayed by a talented actor that ultimately is completely shoved aside. So nothing about Finn in my book was ever really resolved. When you go through The Rise of Skywalker, there's a lot of hints that something's going on with him. He's trying to express something, but it doesn't reach any climax, no resolution. Is he force sensitive? Is that what he's trying to tell Rey? Is he in love with her? Is there this romantic subplot that they decided to drop? We don't know. And it's really a crying shame. Finn's treatment is not by far the only failure of the sequel trilogy, but it's probably the most egregious, I think. And really, Kris, I almost feel like the time is quickly approaching where we are going to have to give the sequel trilogy the same treatment that we gave the prequels, and maybe see if we can put our heads together and fix this mess.
I totally agree with that, and the more that I sit and contemplate on that, the more I agree that I'm ready to fix the sequel trilogy as well. There are in many ways they're a vast improvement over the prequels, but in many ways they repeat some of the same problems, and I think we hinted at that in our prequel episodes. But you look at a character like Finn and what that means, and I know that there's a large portion of the fandom of Star Wars that wants to cry SJW and wants to cry, oh, they're just forced inclusion and forced representation. But those people are tone deaf, and I'm not talking to those people. The people I'm talking to are the young fans, or fans of all ages, that feel acknowledged and that feel appreciated when you have adequate representation from minority groups, from different orientations. I know for myself, when my 2 biracial sons saw Finn on the screen, they were elated. And when we purchased Star Wars Battlefront 2, that was the first character that they chose to be. And then, to see the mistreatment of this character on screen, I almost told them, don't watch the movie, guys. You're just going to be disappointed. That's really problematic. And I can't say enough about the bravery and just the appreciation for the authenticity of John Boyega, and I support him, and I can't wait to support his work in the future. I know that he and Daisy Ridley both have talked about in interviews about struggling to find work after Star Wars, and that's just a travesty because neither one of them need be blamed for the warts for these films, because it's not the acting that's the problem with these movies. The acting is one of the strong suits by all of the the main cast. Oscar Isaac is fantastic as Poe Dameron, but there are parts where they shelve him in the same way. He has, great features in The Last Jedi, but, Force Awakens, he's dead for 90% of the film. So, another underutilized character. And I appreciate Daisy Ridley's performance and Adam Driver. Yes, they are both fantastic actors, but you have other fantastic actors on this screen as well. So, I hope that John Boyega is able to find work, and hopefully some of this is just part of the quarantine COVID mess. But I really appreciate him speaking out and standing up for his truth.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Chris, I actually want to pull on the scab for another second. I'm sitting here thinking about this. And, one of the things I think we need to realize is that they very consciously in the sequel trilogy try to construct sort of a big three again. You know, how you had in the original movies, the big three were Han, Leia, and Luke. And so they very consciously seem to try to imitate that by bringing in Rey, Finn, and Poe. Those are the big three. Now, if you kind of map the trajectories of those characters across the sequels and compare it to the trajectories of the big three in the original trilogy, you'll note that each character had an arc in each movie. Whereas in the sequel trilogy, it feels like both Poe and Finn, they don't really have a clear arc in each movie. In a couple of movies, they're a little more important, but there is no clear arc in each movie for each character. And I think that just comes straight down at the feet of the writer, ultimately. They made a poor choice. They had these main characters that are supposed to be the main focal point, and they didn't clearly think through what each character's trajectory was supposed to be. I think that's really the ultimate problem here.
I absolutely agree, and when you toss back and forth from J.J. Abrams to Rian Johnson back to J.J. Abrams, who took over, like it was almost like this executive oversight that I'm going to take back, Episode 9, and I'm going to come back and right this ship, so to speak. And that's probably, I've said this before, I feel like the biggest problem that I have with Episode 9 is that I feel like it's a 2.5 hour apology for The Last Jedi, for what takes place in that film. And that one of the biggest problems with the sequel trilogy for me is that there is no clear through line. And it's the same problem that I had with the prequel trilogy, in that you had 20 plus years to plan this out. How do you not have a clear 3-film plan? This is the story that we want to tell with these characters. And I'll admit, like, one of the biggest criticisms of The Force Awakens, a movie that I truly enjoyed, was that it was too similar to A New Hope, and it was a little bit too on the nose. But you saw the direction that it was going, but then it just zigged and zagged everywhere else. So I totally agree with that. And it was just very, very poor planning. And now we kind of... The most disheartening thing about it is, like, where do we go from here? We have, stories that we love in the Star Wars property, like Mandalorian, which we'll get to in just a moment. We have, series like The Clone Wars, which just wrapped up and was fantastic. But where do we go from here? I know that there's been talk of, prequels, but I don't know that that's the direction I want to go. Like, we're kind of stuck in this ooey gooey mess that nobody's really happy with.
Yeah, it's similar to Star Trek, really, in that it seems like so many of the Star Trek things in the main timeline, now ignoring the Kelvin timeline for a second, always seem to want to go backwards rather than forwards at this point. First we had Enterprise taking place, way before the original series. Now you have Discovery, which also takes place before the original series. But it's like we left things in a place now with Star Wars where nobody wants to move forward anymore. Everything is looking backwards. I mean, even The Mandalorian takes place technically further back, in the Star Wars timeline. So, yeah, that's a great question. Where are we going from here with Star Wars? What does the future look like? Is there forward momentum left in this franchise? And that's a great question.
Well, and I think it's counterproductive of the entire message of specifically Star Trek is exploration and, exploring new worlds, strange new worlds. And yet I think for me, and this is just a personal viewpoint for me is to be careful with nostalgia. It can be a very, very powerful influence, but sometimes it can be almost like a drug, and that we get too caught up in the past and the glory days, and there have been multiple studies where, remembrances, you remember an event and you remember like vacations or, things better than what they actually were. Like they actually did surveys of, you remember when you went on this vacation, and they asked the individuals like, oh, as you're on the vacation right now, how would you rate your happiness? And it was like a 5 or a 6. It was okay. But then you ask them like months later, even years later, do you remember that vacation when you went to the beach? And oh yeah, man, it was a 9 or a 10. So I think we have to be super careful when it comes to nostalgia, and we don't get too hung up in the past and continue to move forward.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
But we hinted at it a little bit. We're sticking with Star Wars. But Dave, what's your news story for us this week?
Well, I just want to take this opportunity to just talk about The Mandalorian for a second, because we got some great news. The Mandalorian and the Child are about to return. StarWars.com reports that the second season of The Mandalorian will debut on October 30th on Disney+. Now, obviously, every episode of The Mandalorian Season 1 is available right now on Disney+. There's also Disney Gallery The Mandalorian, a behind-the-scenes look of the show. The Mandalorian is a fantastic show, was nominated for 15 Emmy Awards, including Outstanding Drama Series. Let's just say I'm psyched. I'm so pleased that this show is coming back. Star Wars output over the last few years has been pretty uneven. On the movie side, things were more uneven than others. On the TV side, with the Clone Wars, it has been much stronger, and Rebels. And now The Mandalorian. And the first season of The Mandalorian was a complete joy. There isn't a whole lot known about Season 2 so far, and that's how I like it. I went into Season 1 blind, and I enjoyed every minute of it. I can't wait to repeat that experience. I will say that just before this announcement, just a few days before, I saw several posts on Twitter claiming to have inside information that Disney was not satisfied with Season 2, and that reshoots and a delay would be announced soon. Instead, here we are. The Mandalorian is coming on October 30th, and once again, social media gave us much ado about nothing. Chris, what are your thoughts on The Mandalorian's return?
It's the beacon of hope that I needed in this dark, dark world. It's something to look forward to, something that is actually going to take place as scheduled. I loved every single moment of The Mandalorian. I couldn't wait. I referenced this, I think, in our interview with Brian Q. Miller, but I couldn't wait. I would wake up at 5 o'clock every morning, every Friday, and watch the episode before I even got ready for work. I could not wait. It's just... It's everything that we want as Star Wars fans, and it's the opposite of reactions to the films. Everybody seemingly loved it. You'd be very hard pressed to find someone who did not love it. And I truly feel because they have a creative team behind this show, and they let them cook, with the pun intended with Jon Favreau and his experience in culinary. They let him cook. When you have individuals like creator Jon Favreau and executive producer Dave Filoni, who, I owe a lot in my Star Wars fandom and rekindling that fire after being disappointed with so many Star Wars productions. Creating Ahsoka Tano, my personal favorite character in the universe, who hopefully we're going to see in Season 2. I'm just super excited. And, I hope that that Disney and Lucasfilm just let these two guys do what they do best. And I also appreciate, when they bring in directors and other peoples for specific episodes, and let them execute their vision. My main guy, Taika Waititi, did an episode that was just amazing. everybody that's been involved is just knocking it out of the park, and they're just letting these creative people tell the story that they wanted to do. It's kind of the opposite of what we just referenced in the sequel trilogy. They're letting these people tell their story, and it's not like this corporate, overreach. So I'm super excited for this. Din Djarin is a fantastic character. Pedro Pascal, I talked about him, and I gloated about his work on the last episode of this show, but I'm super excited to see where the story goes from here.
There's a lot of good acting going on in that show, a lot of good directing, and a lot of good writing. And it goes to show what the right creators with a clear vision can accomplish with a property, even a property as old and as well-worn as Star Wars. The trick to keeping Star Wars alive, even just to go back to what we were talking about with the earlier news story on John Boyega, the trick to keeping Star Wars alive is to give it to the right creators that have a clear, consistent vision and are willing to execute that vision. I think that's ultimately what we need. Would you agree, Kris?
Yeah, absolutely. And I a lot of people call Favreau and Filoni like the Kevin Feige of, Star Wars, or at least hopefully giving them that role, because I think one of the primary reasons that the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is so successful is because you have an individual like Kevin Feige, who is kind of like the godfather, the puppeteer pulling the strings all behind the scenes and just making sure everything lines up. And, there are certain drawbacks to that. You have, the situation with Ant-Man, Edgar Wright leaving the film because he didn't want to, get in line with the whole connected universe of the Falcon cameo, and you're going to have drawbacks to that, and there are pros and cons to everything. But I think having a central vision and carrying that out, I think that's overall, I think that's very, very positive.
I totally agree with that. Well, there you have our news segment. Coming up after the break, we're joined by author James Aquilone, so stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back, nerds. We're joined today by author James Aquilone, writer of the Dead Jack series of novels filled with humor and the supernatural. He is kickstarting a tabletop RPG, Pandemonium Noir, in collaboration with Ravendesk Games, will soon release his third book in the Dead Jack series, and is planning his first comic book work, Man Bomb. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's get to it. James, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So, our very first episode of our podcast, we featured our nerd origin stories. We kind of talked about what the nerdy influences were in our life. What sort of nerdy influences led you to become an author of comic books and novels?
Well, I grew up in the 70s, so that was like prime time for nerds. I was right there in the beginning of Star Wars and Superman the movie. TV was like Batman, the 1966 series. So I was just inundated with that stuff, probably from like the age of 3 on. And I was really crazy about comic books. So that was probably what got me into writing and into superheroes and all those like science fiction and fantasy thing.
Now, how did you get started in writing? And did you have any particular writers that were big influences for you? When I first started writing or wanting to write, I was probably in my mid-teens, and I wasn't necessarily then thinking about writing in like speculative fiction. I was really into like crime dramas, and I kind of wanted to stay away from genre. I was kind of being like a literary snob, so I wouldn't read like Stephen King or anything like that. So I would read like James Joyce and Franz Kafka and Shakespeare, because I thought like that would be the way to go. That's what would make me a great writer. And after a few years of that, it kind of was boring, and I kind of went back to like genre. And my wife was a big fan of horror, and she read a lot of Stephen King, so she kind of turned me onto that. And then I was like, oh, okay, this is fun and this is cool, and this is the type of stuff I want to write.
That's fantastic. So we read over the bio on your website, and there is something that kind of stuck out at us, and that is that you mention a brief stint as a child model. And we simply had to ask about that. It sounds like such an interesting story. What exactly happened there?
Well, it was just basically one day. I think I was probably 4 or 5 years old, and I think they were having a fashion show thing at my sister's school. And I was such a good-looking kid that whoever was putting the show on was like, we want him to model like a bathing suit or something. And I was forced to put on a bathing suit and like walk around the school gymnasium where all these like old ladies were like ogling me. And I have pictures of it, and it was very uncomfortable. And yeah, and then I did not want to do that ever again.
That sounds pretty traumatizing. So your professional life has been quite a mixed bag. You also spent time as an alternative rock singer and guitarist. Why did that not pan out for like the long term?
Yeah, when I was in college, then I got really into guitar playing, and I hooked up with a bunch of friends. This is like 1992, 93. So this is all like, when grunge was hitting. And we did a couple of shows, and we played the old Lemoore in Brooklyn, and a couple of other gigs. Never made any money doing it. And then it was just like the typical rock and roll band thing. We had a falling out, and the band broke up, and I moved. That's when I kind of was like, all right, focus on writing. Rock and roll's too hard.
Rock and roll's too hard. I love that. So Dead Jack is such an interesting story and concept. There's so much going on with that. Where did the idea for that novel and really the entire world of Pandemonium spawn from?
I had launched a website. This is back in like 2005, 2006. And my main interest was wanting to do web comics. And the first web comic I did was actually about an exploding man, which is now going to be Man Bomb. That's my first comic. It's going to come out. We're going to do a Kickstarter next month. But I wanted to really do a web comic based on a detective. But I didn't want it to be like your standard type of detective story. I wanted it to be like a weird detective story. So just thinking really of the ways to do that. And there have already been, I think, like robot detectives and other stuff like that. So I really like zombies. So I thought, my first thought actually when I was like, ooh, a zombie detective, was like, oh, that's pretty stupid. And I'm like, how would that work? And that's what I was going for, though, just make it silly and fun. And then the webcomic didn't work out, so I just wrote a short story on it and basically just filed it away in like 2006, and then figured that no one would be interested in it, and I didn't even think of trying to get it published. So I pretty much filed it away for about 5 years. And then like in 2011, I decided that I better try to really jumpstart my fiction writing career. And I took my first fiction writing class, because I already had a degree in journalism and been working in journalism for years. But I took the class, and then I submitted it for they do like 2 stories that they critique, and everyone flipped out for it. They go, "This is great, and this is amazing. I would read this if this was a series." And I wasn't even meaning to. I wasn't gonna submit the Dead Jack story. I was gonna submit something else that I was writing, but I didn't finish it. So right before the deadline, I just was looking through my stuff, and I put the Dead Jack story in there, and I was really surprised by the reaction. And then I put it away again. And then the next year, Weird Tales was looking for zombie stories. They were doing a zombie-themed issue. And I submitted it, and the editor at the time loved it, and I was surprised again and accepted it. And that was my first short story acceptance. And then everything pretty much took off after that, after it being published in Weird Tales. And then we did a Kickstarter. And then 2 months after the Kickstarter, the series got optioned for movies and TV. And now we're doing a game.
So now the publisher of Dead Jack is listed as Homunculus House. Is that a self-publication or is that a publishing company that you worked about?
That's me. It's had a crazy history already. But I did the Kickstarter. I raised about $5,300, and I had every intention just to self-publish it because when I was writing it, my idea was that I'm just going to have fun with this, and I'm just going to write it the way I want to write it. And I don't think any publisher would be interested in it. He's a zombie. He drinks. He smokes. He's addicted to fairy dust. So I figured like publishers would not like that. So I said, I'm just going to do this on my own. That way I can write it the way I want to, and it could be just crazy. And I self-published it. It did very well, sold thousands of copies. But then I ended up getting an agent. And, of course, my agent then wanted to sell it to a publisher because at that time it already had been optioned. So after, like, about a year, we ended up getting a deal. We got a 2-book deal with a small publisher. And then they republished the first book, and then they were going to put out the second book. And it was a disaster. The small publisher just did not stick to their contract. They didn't do any promotion. They never even sent me like print copies of the book, and then they basically folded just a few months later. And to this day, I never got any royalties. I never made a dime off of it, and we ended up selling an audio book while they had it. So they got half of the advance from the audiobook. They got a few $1,000s from that, and yet they paid me. So then I ended up getting my rights back, and then I had to go and wait a few more months, and then I had to self-publish it again. So then it's been published now 3 times.
Wow.
Yeah, that is something. Would you say that self-publishing is sort of the route to go for aspiring writers at this point? The entry level of publishing yourself seems to be, so much lower these days. Do you think that's a better route for aspiring authors than trying to get with an actual publisher?
I think for certain genres, I mean, if you're going to write something like zombie fiction, it's definitely better to self-publish. I know a lot of zombie authors who do very well self-publishing, and a lot of publishers, big publishers and small publishers, won't touch a zombie book, and they're very against like stuff like if you got a zombie book, if it's vampires, they just automatically reject it. So if you have something that's a very kind of classic subgenre, you're definitely better off self-publishing it because there's really big fandoms centered around those genres, and you'll do well. I mean, if you're doing like straight like literature, then you're probably best off, going after a big publisher or even like a mid-list publisher. I mean, to self-publish to be successful, you really have to have a series. I mean, it's very hard then to market just a single book and then come out with another, single book. But if you have a series and it has a very a strong fandom like vampires, zombies, you can do very well.
Well, and we referenced this in the intro, but now you're writing a tabletop RPG based on the series called Pandemonium Noir. How is this any different of a writing process than, writing a novel or a comic or something else? Or is it similar?
There's some similarities. I mean, it's very different because you don't tell a full story. As I'm learning, you have to really just give them elements to tell. They're basically telling the story. So you're just giving them the setting, you give them some plot points, and you try to steer them in a certain way. But people playing the game can take it really anywhere. So my instinct as a writer is to tell the full story and to tell it my way. So with an RPG, you really can't do that. So you're giving them the tools to tell their own story or to explore the world. So it's very different in that way. So you're basically like deconstructing your story. So that's something I'm learning because I'm not too familiar with RPGs. So I'm really in my role is to really kind of just fill in like descriptions and stuff about the characters and the settings. And Alex, he's doing basically the game mechanics and stuff. But we collaborated on both.
Now, Pandemonium as a world, from what I've read, sounds really interesting. Can you describe to our listeners a little bit what the setting for this tabletop RPG actually is like, what it looks like?
Well, Pandemonium is an alternate dimension. It's kind of a mirror world to our world. It takes place. I mean, in the book, it's the 1940s. It's like post World War II. The games will kind of stretch it into like the mid 50s, but it has that noir feel about it. And we're really just focusing on one area of that world, which is the 5 boroughs, which is based on New York City. So basically, there are things that are analogous to the real world. So in what would be Pandemonium's New York City or Manhattan, there's a place called like the Empire Snake Building instead of the Empire State Building, and Central Park is the Wood of Shadows. So all the real landmarks in New York City are represented in the 5 boroughs of Pandemonium, but they're a little bit off. But Coney Island is still Coney Island in Brooklyn.
Now, speaking of New York, you stated that Spider-Man was a supremely influential character, and it doesn't get much more New York with the way of superheroes than Spidey. Can you expound on that and why he's so important to you?
When I was a kid, but the first superheroes I was really into were Batman and Superman. As I said before, the Batman TV show, the Adam West TV show was always running, so that was my first love of superheroes. Then it was Superman, the movie, came out in 1978, and I was crazy about that. But then when I started reading Spider-Man comics, it was a whole different thing because I really identified with Peter Parker, where you can't really identify with Superman or Batman. But Peter Parker was a nerd, and Peter Parker had no friends, and Peter Parker was just like everybody else. And I was like, wow, and that kind of blew my mind. I was probably like 6 years old. And then I think whenever I would be down as a kid, I'd be like, but Peter Parker, he's also Spider-Man. And that meant something to me. And that was probably the first time reading that I really connected with a character.
Now, as somebody who's, read comic books as a child growing up, who is now doing his first comic book work with Man Bomb, what to you makes comic books such a special medium in comparison to something like movies and TV or even just prose writing? What makes comic books special, do you think?
Yeah, there's something very special about comics that I think just really excite me, just even holding them and just flipping through them. It's that combination of the art and the text. I mean, I love that. I mean, even as a kid, I just loved magazines and newspapers, just seeing text and images. I thought it was so great. I mean, that's what is kind of crappy nowadays with websites and all that print media is going away, because it just something about that just really spoke to me. And there's something about comics that I don't think any other medium can really do. And that's why I was like, I have to do a comic book. I know I've done novels, short stories, and now even doing RPG, but it's like, I have to do a comic book. And it might not be great for like your career, because they tell you have to stay in like one like medium, and you have to stay in one genre. So now I'm going into a whole different genre, whole different medium. And but I don't care. I mean, I just want to do a comic book. It'd be super cool just to have a comic book and to hold it, and just to see it like in a comic book store would be awesome.
Now, we've kicked it around a little bit throughout the interview, but Man Bomb is the comic that you're hoping to kickstart in October. But take us a little bit deeper. What's it all about? Do you have an artist attached? Just tell us a little bit more about that.
So Man Bomb, he's a human bomb, but he can't really control his explosions. So he gets upset, he can explode. He gets excited, he can explode. So I really was thinking about what would it be like if you were a human bomb in like a post 9/11 world, it would probably not be really good for you. So there would be a lot of issues, and that's where the idea came from. And then I just kind of started expanding on that. Like I said, it was a webcomic back in 2006, and I did about 8 issues or eight comics. And I always wanted to bring it back. And now I kind of expanded the story, so it'll be, well, basically the bad guy is a guy running for president, and it involves all kind of conspiracy theories, and basically Man Bomb gets he's blamed for like blowing up his superhero team, and then the rest of the comic is him trying to escape the evil presidential candidate and not get arrested and not blow everybody out.
That's really fascinating. One of the things that I've noticed about the Dead Jack series is that it has a really strong sense of humor. Are you going for a similar tone with Man Bomb, this sort of fast-talking, smart alecky sort of approach, or is this something a little different for you?
It'll definitely have humor. The Man Bomb character is probably not as snarky as Dead Jack. He's probably a little bit more timid. So in that they're different. But if you're a fan of Dead Jack, you'd like this too, because it is in the same type of tone, but they're definitely different characters.
Now, how could people contribute to make Pandemonium Noir and Man Bomb a reality? How can they keep track of you and your work?
You can go to deadjack.com. You can find me on I'm Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can also go to jamesaquilone.com.
All right, that's fantastic. Now, we're also going to go ahead and include the link to the Kickstarter in our show notes to make sure that our listeners can find the Kickstarter to Pandemonium Noir. Thank you so much, James, for taking the time for the interview. We really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks so much.
Stick around, folks, because after the break, we are bringing you some new nerd commendations. Alrighty, folks. Thanks for sticking around. Now it's time for our final segment of the show, which is, of course, Nerd Commendations, where we recommend new nerdy media that you might enjoy. Kris, what is your nerd commendation for this week?
Well, I'm throwing it back about 10 years on a show you might not have heard of, or you've forgotten how much you love it. And I'm going with an animated show that's streaming on Disney Plus right now called Avengers, the Earth's Mightiest Heroes. This is just a great show. What I appreciate about it the most is like it doesn't dumb it down to like a kid's level, so like people of all ages can enjoy this. And you know how I am when it comes to theme songs, and this has one of the best. It's really rockin'. It's super catchy. It grabs your attention. One of those things where you run to the screen whenever you hear it. Other thing that I really, really appreciate about this show is that it seemed pretty faithful to like the source material in the comics, or at least as close as you can be. And like it has some really great writing on it. The storylines with Kang the Conqueror, going back and forth in timelines is super, super interesting. The first couple of episodes are basically like the first 4 episodes are basically like an origin story for each of the main characters. So it's really great, really interesting. The voice acting is fantastic. You have Eric Loomis as Iron Man. You have Colleen O'Shaughnessy as Janet Van Dyne the Wasp. Brian Bloom as Captain America, Rick Wasserman as Thor, Chris Cox as Hawkeye, and Fred Tatasciore as the Hulk. I also really, really appreciated the inclusion of T'Challa the Black Panther, and this was way before the MCU inclusion of the character, so it really prepped me to get super, super excited about that. And you know, the great thing about this cast is it's pretty. You know, the makeup of the team is pretty true to the original Avengers comics from the 60s. You've got Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne being part of the team as well. So I really, really appreciated that. It's just a really, really fun show, and I enjoyed it a lot, and I highly recommend it.
You know, it's funny because I was completely unaware of this series. I mean, completely. I knew there was an animated series that somewhat tied in with the MCU, but this even predates that series, which I think is called Avengers Assemble.
Yes.
So I'm very curious. In terms of tone and roster, it sounds more like classic Avengers stuff. More Stan Lee than Bendis or MCU. For somebody who knows the Avengers primarily from the MCU like I do, can somebody like me still enjoy the series even though it's a little more classic, a little more old school?
Yeah, I think so, because like I said, they take the first 4 or 5 episodes doing like origin stories. So like some of these characters may be new to you, but they tell like the backstory of everybody. So it's pretty new, viewer friendly, if you will.
Fantastic, that's great. Well, then I'll definitely try to check that out.
All right, Dave, you're taking us somewhere that I did not expect. You're taking us to the Boneyard. What's going on?
Hey, my shelf of comic books is about as eclectic as it gets. And by now, our audience knows that I love the stuff that flies under the radar, the stuff that has loyal fans but never quite hit the mainstream. And I think my recommendation this time fits that mold to the T. So Boneyard is a fantasy humor comic book that was published quarterly between 2001 and 2009 by NBM and was both written and drawn by Richard Moore. The book actually won the 2005 Gold Medal for All Ages Graphic Novels from Forward magazine. In the book, the character Michael Paris inherits a plot of land in the town of Raven Hollow. When he gets there, he finds that this plot of land is actually a graveyard, and it has some rather alive residents. A vampire, a demon, a sea creature, a witch, a Frankenstein's monster-like creature, and more. And because of all these monsters living there, the townsfolk are trying to burn the place to the ground. But there's also other forces at work here, and in this story, it turns out the monsters are actually the good guys. This book is so much fun. The humor is spot on. It spoofs, but it also respects horror and its cliches. The writing is incredibly witty, and Richard Moore's art just sings. There's also a really great slow burn relationship between Paris and the vampire Abby that is really a joy to watch as it slowly unfolds. There's a strong romantic undertone in there that keeps rearing its head and works surprisingly well in conjunction with the humor. This has stood as one of my favorite comic books for years. I ran into it quite by accident, and I still frequently revisit the story because it's just such a delight. Now, the book was originally published in black and white, but there were also some colorized trades that have been put out since the original run ended. The book was collected across 7 trade paperbacks, and although it never quite got a proper resolution to all of its story threads, there is a somewhat satisfying end that definitely makes the journey worth it. We'll include a link to the first volume in our show notes, but I will say it's just a lot of fun. If you're looking for a comic book to just kick back and enjoy the joy of it, the humor and just the pure fun, this is just the perfect under-the-radar book to read.
Yeah, this looks... I'm just looking up the cast list, the residents of the Boneyard on the Wikipedia page, and it looks super fascinating. Nessie's character description especially is standing out, to say the least.
That's not the only thing that stands out about Nessie.
But yeah, I'm super intrigued to read this. I've always been a fan. You know, we're big history nerds, you and I both. Like, you know, I signed up for free courses on Coursera just to study old ancient history that I've already taken classes for, just for kicks. That's what I do in my free time. But like, you know, seeing all these, you know, monsters that have been, you know, woven throughout mythology and throughout history is super, super exciting to me. Oh my God, they have a talking raven named Edgar. I'm in.
Yeah, I figured you might really enjoy this one. I want to say also that not sure if the last couple of volumes were ever colorized. So if you really enjoy the color versions, you might have to switch to black and white towards the end of the run. But trust me, the art is so good and the story is so much fun, I don't think that even matters at this point.
All right, that wraps up another episode of the Nerd Byword podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. Stay glued to your podcast feeds every Monday morning. We're going to be gracing you with another episode. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and our website, nerdbyword.com. If you did catch us on social media at Nerd Byword on Instagram, we had a really, really cool announcement. We're doing a cross-promotion incentive where you record the intro to our show. Usually when we have like a guest join us, they'll say, "Hey, this is bloody bloody blah, author of bloody bloody blah," and then, you're listening to the Nerd Byword. So if you have like clothing company, if you have a nerdy website that you want to feature on the show, record a 10 to 15 second clip of your show for our show, and then email that to nerdbyword@gmail.com.
Yes, and we're really excited to feature your intros. I think that this is going to be a lot of fun, and we're really looking forward to that. Don't be strangers on social media. We've been having quite a bit of fun there, not just with cross-promotions, just interacting with our fans of the podcast. Feel free to tweet at us with some questions or comments. We'll be more than glad to interact with you there, and we're always looking for suggestions for interesting new comic books or other nerdy media to read ourselves. You never know, one of those might actually make a nerd commendation.
Thanks so much, guys. Stay well and stay nerdy.
The Nerd Byword is written and produced by Kris and Dave, two nerds with a love of all things pop culture. The podcast features music by Al Jimenez and show art by Ashery Design. Find us at nerdbyword.com and wherever podcasts are available.